I'm here with world-renowned psychic and channel Paul Selig, and we're talking about his latest book, Resurrection, Book One, the Manifestation Trilogy. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks for having me.
It's always great to have you on the show. And first, I just want to start by asking, how are you? How is Lily, who we see in the background, and how's Hawaii?
You know, I'm good. I'm tired today for some reason. Lily's tired too. She's sacked out on the couch, but we're both good. Yeah. And I'm loving Hawaii still. I'm on Maui, and, it was an unexpected gift. And I didn't expect this to become my home, but it did. And I'm very glad for that. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last time with all of the big changes that are happening, and much of what the guides have been talking about. This is the upside of the change that's going on.
For me, it has been, yeah.
I'm glad to hear that. Well, we've been in conversation for a number of years now, and it's been a privilege to observe and be part of the unfolding of these texts and these teachings. And there's a lot of attunements happening in the books, in the reading of the books, in the teachings, that the workshops that you offer. And we'll get into some of that in this conversation. But one question I have is, can you talk a little bit about how this work, channeling this work and receiving these teachings and these attunements have affected you personally?
Sure. A few years ago, people would ask me this, and I would say, well, my life is very different now. And that was always true, but I don't know that my life was what I thought it should be, or what I wanted it to be, or what I would have expected. I've always, called myself the radio for the work. I'm, in broadcast. I'm in some ways the stenographer for the guides when they dictate through me, and the dictation becomes the book. There's no editing involved. When I look at my life now, I'm understanding what they've been talking about on an experiential level that I didn't know that I ever would. And I don't think I'm necessarily the best student of their work, because I'm the one taking the dictation. I think if you were channeling these books, I might go, oh, this is great. And I could sort of say, well, I like this. I don't agree with that. I could have my own objectivity. Mm-hmm. And it's a little more challenging when you're the mouthpiece for something. I mean, I close my eyes, I hear one phrase repeated, and then everything follows. And I'm just trying to keep up. So my ability to fully trust them, and I do, truthfully, I really do. I have no reason not to, has been very much informed by my own experience. And I don't think that these teachings are for the faint of heart some days. I think this isn't easy woo-woo. This isn't put a slogan up and sort of, smile a bunch on Instagram. I don't think it does that. I think this is something very different. And when I look back over the last few years of my life and the books, I'm going to say this. At the end of the Mastery Trilogy, which ended, I believe, with the Book of Freedom, there was a moment at the very end of that dictation that surprised me, that was directed towards me. I had been in a funk, and I was working with a prayer minister for a period of time. And she said, well, I'm going to ask your guides questions on your behalf. Mm-hmm. And I went, okay. And when asked what was up with me, they said, well, Paul's job is to be the doorway. He gets to hold the door open for others. And I went, well, that just sucks. And the prayer minister said, well, that just sucks. That can't be right. He gets to hold the door open. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of the Mastery Trilogy, unexpectedly, they said the door is open and everybody gets to come through now. And Paul, you get to come through too, which was tremendously moving for me. But when I look at my life since then, yeah, it's happened. And the guides say we're all the doorways, we're all the doorways for the energy that they bring through. In my opinion, holding the door is bringing through the teachings. That's my job. There are things that they talk about now about manifestation, which I still like to argue once in a while, but I'm experiencing them. So the life that I'm living now is a life I would not have known to choose. And I have these odd experiences now where I think, I wonder if I should go to the dermatologist. And then I get a call the next day from the dermatologist's office that said, we had a record that you tried to reach us a year ago. Now, do you want an appointment? I'm going, okay. So it's a bit of that now. And it's not about demanding what I should have and telling the universe, give me this, give me that. It's mostly about moving towards a place of receptivity and allowance, where things come to pass through, they would say energetic accord, ACCORD or ACHORD. So I'm going to say, and I never thought I would ever say this publicly, I'm the happiest I've ever been in my entire life. And I don't mean happy like I'm getting what I want. I'm happy in that I'm having an experience, and not 24/7, but of peace. And it's not what I want still, which is to be walking around in this awareness of union 24/7. But I'm in a state of gratitude more often than not, I have to say. And all that's changed in some ways is I let go of how I thought things were supposed to be and what they were supposed to look like. And that allowed things to change. And then I had to keep saying yes. So that's where I'm at now. And I do work with the attunements and I do work with the teachings. And the easier ones are still the easiest. Don't make choices based in fear. The action of fear is to claim more fear. What you damn damns you back. What you bless blesses you in return. All that stuff is easy. But also claiming the word or the energy that they work with through situations and relationships and in my participation to my own creations in the world seems to work very well.
I'm so glad to hear that you're happy.
Thanks.
And so much of what you're describing is in this book, and it's been in all of the books, but really talking about it's not what you expect. And good.
Yeah. They say the guides say, the small self is just the personality structure knows itself through historical data and also whatever the societal norms are, So I'm off trying to buy my first car. I'm learning, I'm 60. I've got my learner's permit. I'm very excited. I never thought I would learn to drive. I was a non-driver, that's how I perceive myself. And, of course, I'm looking everything up on the web and listening to what everybody says because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I'm still buying into the collective shoulds. And a person like me in my age should be driving such and such. It's all a bunch of crap, I understand that most of what we ask for or expect or what we think we're supposed to have, given our ideas of who we are, how we're seen in the world, or what somebody should want or be. And that's the big difference now, which is, it's about, how can I say this? Letting go of the data or the precedent or the idea of what has been. They say the small self knows itself through history. That's it. But in the divine self or the true self knows itself in the infinite now, where all things are possible, not just what our parents said we could have or the culture says we're allowed or a church says we can be or do. And that's what I'm beginning to see, outpictured in my life. And it's fascinating to see because it's, I kind of go, well, if this is true for me, it's true for everybody. I ain't that special, and I see it.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I'm just looking at, I pulled some quotes from the book, sure. And you touched on one of the topics. The upper room, it says the upper room is not the place to get what you want. It's the place to receive what you require. Mm-hmm. And maybe you can say a little bit more about that, and a little bit of a synopsis of the upper room and the lower room for people who are not yet.
Sure. The guides say that we live in our reality as we know it is a shared octave of experience. They don't talk about dimensions, really. They talk about notes and octaves and sound. And so we're in this shared octave with low notes and high notes. And they say that everything that we see and we experience here, we're in accord to and in a certain level expect, because, we're always getting what we expect. We expect the sun to come out. We expect, whatever we expect. So we're in this shared octave, and we're in vibration or tone within this octave, as is everyone and everything else. The teaching of the guides is in some ways a teaching of transposition. They're saying any song can be sung in a higher octave. Any piece of music can be played in a higher octave. And the upper room, they say, is the octave above the one that we have been operating through. They also say that it's where the true self, or the divine self, or the seed of the divine within us is realized. The true self already expresses there. You can call it Christ consciousness, I guess. That's one of the ways they've described, and that's not a religious teaching. It's a level of awareness and agreement to what is true. So what they seem to be doing in these teachings is, through these energetic attunements and instructions, they're supporting us in aligning at that level of tone or vibration. The upper room, in some ways, I think, is like the foyer for everything that exists beyond. And they also say that the upper room, or the kingdom, which they say is present from the upper room. The kingdom, they say, is the awareness of the inherent divine in all manifestation. God as all sound, as all tone, as all things, seeking reclamation through our awareness. They say that, the kingdom is the highest we can align to while maintaining form. Mm-hmm. That's as much as you can go without a body. With the body. After the body, you're not even moored. You don't have to worry about a bunch of other stuff. So I see the upper room as the dominion of the true self, and the guides are seeking the realization of the true self and bringing us to the place where that can occur. Mm-hmm. And from the upper room, you move to receptivity. So I'm challenged by this still. I did used to say, before I ended up on Maui, boy, I'd love to live someplace retreat-like, where I could maybe see the water. And, it's what I ended up. I had actually gone to Hawaii once on a bad blind date, maybe 12 years ago. And on the plane back said, I am never going back to that state as long as I live. Of course, it's where every time I said it's never going to happen, that's where I end up. So, but I do understand now that holding the potential for what seeks to be revealed happens here. It can be so. It will be so. God is, they say. It's not about coming up here with the checklist of, I want to marry a handsome brunette with an anchor tattoo on the right bicep. Which people do. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that is, the person who's making that list is operating from an idea of him or herself, and what he or she should have or attract. And that self is somewhat limited because it only knows itself through past experience. Understand? So, it's not like we don't know what's best for us, but it's kind of like, I don't know that we have to always tell Source what we want. We can agree to what is present for us at the level that we can hold it. The level that we can hold it means we can't manifest anything unless we're in vibrational accord to it. I mean, I believe the guides teach co-resonance all the time. And they say the world that you're experiencing right now is what you are in agreement to. Everything you see, you're in accord with. Manifestation isn't just having like a vision board where you paste things on it. Manifestation is my relationships are working and not working, and my finances are challenged, and my body is uncared. All of these things we're also in accord to because it's our reality. And so if we shift how we operate, and I think of it kind of like turning the dial on a radio to play a higher broadcast, we begin to call to us what expresses at that level. That's that simple.
That makes a lot of sense. And in the book, they're talking a lot about becoming aware of our divine self, the divine within us, and holding that. And another little quote I picked out was to knowing both heaven and earth while in form. And it seems like that's the upper room, being aware of the upper room while also having this body.
Yeah, this is never been a teaching of what people now call spiritual bypassing and pretending. It's like not pretending that, I don't have to take the garbage out every Thursday, because I do. That's part of my responsibility to my life and my home. But it's that old idea of being in the world but not of it. That's really that simple. People sometimes say to me, I have a great spiritual life, but my professional life is a disaster. And I go, well, your professional life is your spiritual life. It's all your spiritual life. It's not about a little piece of the pie that you dedicate towards a practice. It's everything. The guides more recently, because I just did a week at the Omega Institute, and they were teaching presence in being. In a whole other kind of way. And it's about how we show up for everything that shifts everything that we encounter. The guides, and that's again being the doorway. If you become the conduit for the higher tone, higher energy, because that's where you're expressing it, you're actually lifting everything you encounter to it. By nature of co-resonance, it's not about fixing it all. It's about reclaiming it all as of source, as of spirit. The guides have said again and again and again, the only real problem we face is the denial of the divine. And that's the simple teaching of what you damn damns you back. And what you bless blesses you in return. It's not like you're going to go bless the atrocity that you see on the news. It's not about that, but it is about reclaiming the presence of the divine where it has been actively and purposefully been denied or ignored or refuted. Because that changes what is seen. At least that's how I understand it.
Yes. And, the title of this book, this is your 10th book, start of a new trilogy. So you got a couple more.
I know.
At least. And the title is Resurrection. And the time, and another quote, the time of resurrection is the time of reconciliation of the aspect of humanity that has always known truth at the cost of the lies that humanity has perpetuated through separation. That's what you're talking about.
Absolutely. That's the essence of the teaching. When I go back to the first book, which was called I Am the Word, which they dictated through me in 2009 over 2 weeks, I didn't know there was a book coming till 2 days before, and I just agreed as an experiment to take the dictation for it. I actually now suspect that that book holds the DNA for the teachings that have followed. In some ways, it's sort of the introduction to all that they teach. But what they're teaching now is the nuts and bolts of it, I think, in a real practical way. At least, I don't remember much of the books when I do the dictation. I retain, like after a lecture, I might retain a couple of ideas, or I may be struck by a metaphor, but mostly I'm just so busy keeping up with the speaking. And then the first time that I actually experience the book is when I sit to do the audiobook, and then I have to read the whole thing aloud. And that's when I kind of get it. And then I still forget. the bulk of it. And some of it's because I take so much dictation that it all sort of blurs into one watercolor of the guide's messages. But I don't know. I know there's 2 more books. I'm actually supposed to be starting the newest one almost as we speak. And I don't know the title. I don't know anything. I don't know where they're going. And I never do. But I still find that sort of disconcerting, especially because after the first book, I thought, can this ever happen again? And every time they finish a book, I think, well, there's nothing else for them to say. That's it. We're done, And then I think, well, maybe I get to go about my own business again. And anyway, I don't even remember what your question was.
No, you're gonna, I'm always charmed by your relationship to the guide. It's charming, and and you're. It's not frustration, but just the fact that you would be like, I don't even know the title, and and that happens every time. It's very endearing to me. So
thank you.
And you're, and I always enjoy your channeling because, and even in the book, it's there where you interrupt the guides and you're like, wait a minute, this, and they'll say something like, Paul's concerned, or Paul has a question. We don't really want to answer it. Yeah. It's always just it's real. It's very real, which is part of why it's endearing.
I say sometimes, there's all these books in print that I didn't write, but my name is on the cover. And so there's a certain level of responsibility that I feel as being the collaborator or the voice or the radio for the broadcast. And so if they say something that I just can't understand or don't think I could agree with, they kind of have to unpack it most of the time. If otherwise, I'm going to shut up, and honestly, if there wasn't, because most of the books, all the books now are done in front of audiences. Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't do them all. I've never done one without an active listener. And now there's sometimes hundreds of active listeners when the dictation happens. And it's curious. But, I understand that if I question something, there's a valid reason. And they also have been known now to say, Paul has a question, we're not going to answer it, which I love. Yeah. And what they've also, because then I know that they're in charge. And what I really most love is how they now anticipate my questions before I've even formed them. Yeah. And I think they do that. And I can tell because they're saying, Paul has a question. What if I and my fellows are strolling down the boulevard? It's like not my language. And I go, I didn't say that. Yeah, but they're creating the question as I was trying to form it in my own way. And I think as a way to maintain the trajectory of the text. There was one book when I interrupted and I think I skewered the whole chapter. And they delivered a whole other lecture than I think was intended. That was the book of knowing and worth. Mm-hmm. There was the woman who was always on the phone for the first couple of books, Victoria Nelson, was in the room with me, and I was nervous because there was somebody there, and her sneakers squeaked on the wood floor, and I jumped out of my skin. I can't do this. Because the rule is I don't get to go back and change things. I don't get to go back and fix them. Once, I think it was in the first or second book, the UPS guy kept buzzing my apartment buzzer back in New York, and I ended up cursing. And the guide said, "We will pick this up tomorrow." They allowed that to be the edit, but really that's it. So when that happened with Victoria, I thought, "Oh my God, the whole book was just ruined." Mm-hmm. And in fact, no, the guides decided to deliver an entire rest of the chapter on my resistance and my fear to taking the dictation, which was a useful chapter. I hear, and it's one of my favorite books. Strangely enough, because it's such a loving book. Anyway.
No, I do think it's helpful. I think if you have the question, other people have the questions. It's and there's, that dialogue I think is interesting for people and helpful for people. One thing I'll say is when reading this, and I got an advanced copy, and it's well dog-eared there, and I have a hard time retaining the language of it. And from the beginning, I have not, the language isn't necessarily what I'm relating to in it. And I think I've talked to you about this, and I love listening to the audiobooks too, because they're empowering the words, and that's what any good writer is going to do. But they're in my estimation, they're infusing these words with energy that is working on you as you're encountering the material, whether it's in a live workshop or in the book. Or
oh yeah, I mean that's it. They explained it in the very first book, and they said this is a book that's experienced rather than read. And then they also said this isn't a self-help book, and they don't write self-help books.
No.
But the energy, they say, that is the book is infused in the language and exists between the lines of the text. And in a certain way, it's as if the book is in conversation with the reader. And they've gone so far. In one of the books, they say, if you're having a question while you're reading the book, ask the question. Because while we're dictating the book through Paul, we're also with you as you're reading it. And we'll answer them in the text. And people started reporting, I asked a question on page 13, page 14, it was answered, and people go back and they read the books again and feel like it's an entirely different text than they first read. But it's all the energy. The phenomena attached to the books is comparable to the phenomena that's experienced in the workshops, which is the energy is palpable. People begin to open up. I've had people, the very first reviews came out for the first book. Nobody knew who I was or what I did. And people started saying, I'm reading this book and my body's vibrating. I'm reading this book and I'm seeing auras. I'm reading this. My favorite was I'm reading this book and my husband's changing. I like that one. But, it's been like that from the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like what you say too about this is not some simple new age woo-woo thing. It's not simple. And I think that some people, do have this expectation that, when they become spiritual, in quotes, things are going to get easy. Will have arrived. And the book reinforces this. And I think anyone who's engaged in a path of consciousness understands you don't arrive exactly, you continue being, you continue arriving. And quoting the book again, this was strong and a strong statement. You must all understand that as a species, you are on the brink of such radical change that the excuses you have used to deny the well-being of your fellow will be the ash on your faces if you continue. You may understand that the offering humanity has now to all that exists on any plane is its reconciliation with Source, and you cannot reconcile with Source if you are denying it, which we talked a little bit about. But this brink of the species, we've been talking about this. We were talking about this with the book before COVID, and I remember feeling, this feels a little dire, a little scary, which I'm going to get rid of the fear. And then COVID came and everything changed for everyone on the planet. So they predicted it, and it's ongoing. It's not done.
No, it's ongoing. And there were things, because this book was dictated before, this was dictated last summer, so a year ago, before the war in the Ukraine and things like that. And there were a lot of references to war in the book, which threw me a little bit. I don't see it as dire. I do get that we have an opportunity, and that they say this again and again, it all has to be perceived as opportunity for us to be able to work with it productively. And I've done that through this time, and it's allowed for change and positive change in my life, I didn't recall the quote that you read, the ash on the face, going, oh, that sounds, dark. But I don't know, they did, in the very, very first book, I Am the Word, they said, humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations, and everything that was created in fear is going to have to be recreated. About 3 days before the election, where Trump was elected, they were lecturing, I think, somewhere in the Midwest. And this teaching is actually up online. It was crazy. And they said, your expectation of choice is, I will have the milk or the cream in my coffee. And what is about to happen is what happens when the table holding the milk and the cream falls over. And we were thinking, what the heck is this about? Because everything sort of seemed like it was going to be the way we thought it was going to be, at least some of us. And so I'm used to them being prescient about what's to come, but they've never spoken gloom and doom. And the joyous message in all this is they said that humanity has made a choice already at a higher level to move beyond separation. And the evidence of that is some of the mess that we're looking at, because things don't change until they're seen.
Yeah, and I want to correct that. I agree. I feel like these books are loving in nature and inspiring and encouraging. They're very encouraging. I think the moment of dire that I was speaking to is a very small thing when you were talking. It was talking about everything's going to change. It felt for a moment like it'll be like nothing you've ever seen, and just a moment of from the own lower self sphere. But the act that we're in, that where we're all having to accept this change, these things that we're not expecting, I think as a collective, as a species, which is what the book's pointing to, is that we're all in this. Yeah. We're all one, and we're all in this together. I want to read you one more quote, because there's some really lovely things. And this is on, it refers to the second coming. And I thought this was a really interesting way of looking at it. What the second coming is the articulation of the Christ or the monad or the divine in the material form or fabric of the world, which we've talked about, and the realization of this, that it is a collective act of reuniting, will reclaim all cultures, all religions. This is not a Christian teaching, and these times have been prophesied in all cultures in somewhat different language and metaphor. That makes a lot of sense to me.
It does to me too. I don't think they're the first to say this, but I understood in the very first book they define Christ as the aspect of the Creator that can be realized in form, the seed of God that seeks flower through us, the God within, and they spoke about Jesus and, other, realized beings as exemplars of that, those who've realized. I don't know. I trust this piece of it. When the guides are teaching and there's a bunch of people in a room and everybody feels the whole heart open up and alight, and then can see with the eyes that align to that, which is seeing the inherent divine in another. It's kind of astonishing. And it is, I almost want to use the word contagious. Once you're doing it, others are doing it as well. It's a great experience. So, the guides are being much more, I think, maybe not much more, but they're being very direct about what they mean with this stuff, In an early book, I got a letter from somebody, an email from somebody that I didn't know, saying, you have to tell your guys to stop working with the word Christ. It's going to alienate a lot of people. And you have to find neutral language to do. And I thought, this is a freaking channel book. I don't get to choose. Maybe they have their, I don't know, their branding person up there, but it's not, I haven't gotten the memo yet. All I can do is hear what I say. But they do, I suspect, reclaim language and concepts that have been misunderstood or misused. So resurrection, they're talking about the resurrection of the divine within each of us and all of us, and the reality that comes as a result of that.
Which is a beautiful concept. I'm wondering if it would be okay to ask the guides a couple of questions.
Well, I had very little sleep last night, and I'm on my second cup of coffee. I'll do my best, but
okay. Well,
all right.
I think the first question that I'd like to ask is just simply, how can I, or this program, or this interview, best serve your message and the work of this book and what you're doing?
The idea of the book is what's important. The book in some ways is an effigy. The book in some ways is an effigy, an idol for those who worship, for those who worship. The idea of a teaching, the idea of a teaching, but the teaching itself is alive. But the teaching itself is alive as each reader, as the transmission occurs, to welcome a reader to a book. To welcome a reader to book is to give them an invitation to themselves in a higher way than they may not have known was possible, than they may have known was possible. When you say yes, your own authorization to realize the self that we teach at the level that we teach, or actually you are actually giving permission to everyone else to share the text is fine. To share the text is fine. To be the incarnation of the text, to be the incarnation of the text, or the messenger as being, or the messenger as being is actually higher. Period. And they're saying period.
Thank you. And just one last question for them.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else that they want us to know at this time? Anything specific they'd like to share?
They're saying what comes before you now is what you need to grow through, and to realize yourself through, is what is before you. So what you see before you may appear to be a wall, but you may rise above the wall, You may not always forge through it. You may not always forge through it. You may be lifted to it. You may be lifted to it to understand why you've created, what you believe it would serve as you, what you believe it would serve as you move beyond it, Humanity itself is saying yes. Humanity itself is saying yes, as the young man said, but you're also being invited, to an awareness, of who you have been, what you have denied, how you have participated in atrocity, individually and collectively. And you will have to see some of this outpictured, in order to realize this will never need to happen again. That this will never need to happen again, period. And they're saying period.
Great. Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the guides. So, Paul, I want to respect your time. I know you have a big, busy day ahead, and just what's next for you? I know you have some upcoming, you have a lot of workshops online that people can take. And
yeah, we do. I do an intensive, a 5-day online intensive every month. I do a Wednesday evening teaching and Q&A with the guides. All that stuff is available on my website, that information. And I'm doing live events again. So I'll be in Berkeley in August, and I will be in Boone, North Carolina in August, and Costa Rica. And I'm going to do my first big public retreat on Maui next spring, which I'm really excited about. It's nice to be with people, and I'm realizing that again as I'm back in a room with people. And the guides, they have a ball, I have to say, when there are people there. They're fine online, but they do seem to have a ball when they get to smile at everybody.
Oh, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out today to come and talk about the book. It's available when? September 20th,
I think, is the pub date.
Great.
And, as an audiobook, and as all the formats are there, and you can get it online in any of the booksellers.
Great. Well, and people can go ahead and pre-order that, I imagine.
Yes, that would be lovely if they would.
Okay. Thanks again, Paul. So great to talk to you.
You too. Thanks for having me. Bye-bye now.
Bye.